Pat Canty, and I'm the publisher of the Odessa American, and I've been in the newspaper business for over 40 years.
I'm Stephanie Rivas. I'm the general manager at the Wagner Noel Performing Arts Center, but I have a 15-year career in television news.
I'm Mary Kate Hamilton, and I'm the co-evening anchor at CBS 7 News.
I'm Victor Lopez. I am the morning anchor at News West 9, and I've been in the business for going on 23 years now.
I think when I started in television news, again, this was many years ago, I think we were always taught that, so it wasn't about your lived experience necessarily, right? But your opinions and thoughts on lived experiences should not go into the work that we were doing. So we were taught to leave that out of what we were reporting. So everything when we were reporting started from just the factual basis, right? If I had an opinion or a feeling about something, I was not to interject that into my work and what I was putting out into the community. And so I think in that respect, that has changed over the years a lot. We're seeing that in this film, where now that's more embraced, and it's a part of what you're going to see in everyday mainstream media, whether it's on a social outlet or in television or even in the written word, right? I do think that there are some places that it can obviously play a great role, but I do think that you can't just look at it as one blanket work experience and say it belongs in all. I think that's unfair to say. I think that there are some places that, yes, it can be a very important part of that, but I do think that there are some times and places that we should leave that out for good reason.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, there was made mention of it at the very beginning of the documentary, and that really shocked me, quite frankly. Because, and mainly because I was coming to it from the perspective of a news lens, okay, as a news reporter. There are other genres of journalism, advocacy journalism, opinion journalism, investigative journalism, where clearly that kind of thing does come into play. I think, though, I was kind of born and weaned, like Stephanie, where if you're a news reporter, you were never supposed to allow your opinions or my lived experiences to affect how I approach the story. I was supposed to do what Woodward and Bernstein said, which was to allow the facts to lead me to the story. And it's very important. And I'm talking in the context of news coverage, because the only thing a news organization has really at the end of the day is its credibility. Okay? And a key part of the credibility is objectivity, because someone reading that story or watching it on television, a news story, they can trust that, so, okay, you're giving me an objective point of view, so I can trust that. And I think if you allow, in news coverage, if you allow your lived experiences or your perceptions or your beliefs to creep into that and to dictate how you cover that story, then I think, unfortunately, what you're doing is you're undermining your own credibility and hurting yourself. But like I said, there's different types of journalism. I can certainly see in advocacy journalism, or when you're doing in-depth think pieces on something, where, yeah, that can be brought to bear. Times have changed, and I understand that.
I think that lived experiences are important, and I think the more that you know about one of your colleagues' lived experiences, the better you can sort of assign, hey, I think you would be a great person for this story. I mean, if it's Black History Month, one of my coworkers who is a woman of color might be a better person to cover that story, not because we are pigeonholing them or, stereotyping them, but because truly they have a story to tell. And I think that's okay. I think that particularly one thing that's spoken about a lot now in newsrooms is that the people that you're putting on air should represent the community that you are serving. So, it's important to us. We have a 60% Hispanic population here in West Texas. We need to have people who speak Spanish, understand Hispanic culture, are able to tell certain stories that I may not be able to. But there's a place really for everyone. But I do think in that case, lived experiences are important, and your bias could be a strength when it comes to telling a lot of stories rather than a weakness. And especially even just being able to relate to your subjects. You know, certain people might feel more comfortable opening up to someone that can speak Spanish or another woman of color. And I think that's important.
I think that Pat, Stephanie, and I come from the school. We hit the market or the job, for lack of a better word, at around the same time. Unfortunately, Kate, you've obviously come much later than that. But I remember I started off as a field reporter before I took the anchor desk, and I had one person tell me flat out during a consulting appointment, nobody cares what your opinion is. Don't tell them how you feel about this. They just want to know what happened and what's being done about it. And I just remember sitting there thinking to myself, how dare this person say that my opinion doesn't matter? But I've noticed that in the years since then, our opinions do matter because, like you said, a person of color, a male or female, whatever, can tell that story better than someone who is not so closely related or affected by whatever the topic is. Mm-hmm. In our newsroom, for example, whenever Hispanic Heritage Month comes along, it's going to be the Hispanic, the Latino employees that pitch certain ideas, and then of course same thing for Black history, Asian American history. So every culture has a representation, and you need that broad base. You need you need those elements in your newsroom to be able to tell a full, complete story. Because, like you said, the stories you tell represent the community that you're serving, mm-hmm. and sure. they need to be well represented.
And I don't think that we disagree, or because I do agree. I think it does. Our opinions do matter, right? Because we are all living, breathing people, and even as mm-hmm. journalists, we'll go into a story and we have this approach to a story. We already have an opinion,
oh, yeah.
right? And whereas we were taught to not maybe share that opinion, I think what is different now than when maybe we were all doing this is that we were to seek out the people that had opinions that reflected maybe the opinions that were in our head, right? And so that when we're telling that story, we are then seeking all the different opinions mm-hmm. to put into one story so that you're covering, again, that full cross-section to tell it. And I think sometimes now because it is allowed so much to openly share that opinion mm-hmm. or speak it so quickly, is that it almost, I think, has lost the reporters have lost that ability to then want to go out and find those. And so a lot of times the story then just becomes very flat. It becomes very much my opinion forward, as opposed to I'm going out into the community and then finding those opinions to help tell the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I may, I think there is a difference between objectivity, which I think is still of paramount importance in journalism, versus diversity of thought and, everyone sort of being able to bring themselves into the workplace and into your newsroom. Because even, I'm walking on the street and I may even see something as a story that someone else might not see as a story, or vice versa. And so in that way, your identity really informs your reporting. But then once you are doing the reporting, staying objective, I think, those should be two different things. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I would challenge our industry to really push more toward the diversity of ideas and the diversity of backgrounds, and not to rely on labels of race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, sex, because my experience has been is that we as individuals are bigger than those labels, and we talk about the push for diversity. The one thing that struck me about this was it seems like all of a sudden, just in the last 3 or 4 years, there's just been this we got to be more diverse in our newsrooms. I got to tell you, when I started in the business 40 years ago, there was a push. We need to be more diverse in our newsrooms. And the way that manifested itself a lot of times was really unfortunate. It was really insulting in more ways than one. And I always remember when I was in the Metropolitan Daily in San Antonio, and they told Stephanie story. A friend of mine was a young black, recent college graduate from Jamaica. And he'd gone to school in the U.S. on a track scholarship. And he was your typical, stereotypical Jamaican cultural story. You know, my mom has 10 jobs. Well, my dad has 20 jobs. And, you know, hardworking, very socially conservative. They hired him, and he was telling me one day, he says, you know, they hired me to cover the east side of San Antonio, which is predominantly black. And he looked at me, he said, you know, I don't know why they did that, because I have as much in common with those people culturally as you do. And that struck me, and it struck him. It was incredibly insulting. The other thing was we said, well, we're gonna embrace the Hispanic culture in San Antonio, obviously, and we're gonna be very sensitive to all things Hispanic. And we came up with a style book, and it was required that anytime a reporter interviewed an Hispanic person, Garcia, do you put the accent over the I? And 9 times out of 10, you ask somebody, and they said, I have absolutely no idea. So what I'm saying is, we have to be careful about how labels define people. Even when we think that embracing those labels is going to show that we appreciate them more. And if we talked about diversity of ideas more, I think it could really push us to push ourselves and to expand ourselves. I mean, I still think back, one of the greatest things I ever did as a young reporter was, it was Martin Luther King Day in San Antonio, and I got to interview the lady who rode on the bus. You know,
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks. And to me, that was the greatest thing.
Wow.
Because I grew up in the civil rights. I was white, but I remember when Dr.
But you
Martin
were
Luther
there.
King was assassinated. And here I am sitting and interviewing Rosa Parks. And it was amazing. So if I, you know, I was lucky to be a white boy interviewing this black civil rights person. So anyway, that's...
You know, going back to what Mary Kate said about objectivity and all that, many's been the time that happens in our newsroom, and I'm sure you guys can relate as well, when, you know, you'll get phone calls, you'll get emails or whatever, and they're asking, why are you covering this? I mean, that's over, that's done. Why do you keep covering it? Why aren't you spending your time covering, you know, this instead? You know, and you sit there and you think, well, this may not be important to you, but it is important to somebody else. And granted, I'm not saying that, you know, your suggestion isn't important. That's just not the important, you know, we can get to that. We'll, you know, in fact, give me the details. I'll look into it, and, you know, we'll get to that, you know, when we can. But, you know, you do have to prioritize. You know, it's like, you know, the extensive, you know, countywide manhunt, or, you know, the 24-hour standoff, or, you know, the multi-car pileup just the other day. You have a priority of things that need to go in order, and not everybody out there understands that.
Right.
It's like, well, there was a heavy police presence outside my front door that, you know, I saw nothing about it on your channel. I said, well, it ended up being nothing. You know, it was, you know, a loud noise call, and, you know, it just took that many officers to quiet things. People don't see all sides of the situation.
Right.
And then they get irritated when you don't see it from their point of view.
Because at the end of the day, news is news, right? And so no matter how many women or men of a race, specific race, I mean, we're all doing that same job in the newsroom, choosing the stories for whatever the valid reason is at that moment in time. But, you know, when we talk about more women, more men, you know, I feel like it has its moments, right? I mean, we talk about when we were starting in news, there was always still that push for diversity, or putting people in our newsrooms that spoke to our community. When I was working at Channel 9, I was the first female Hispanic anchor that they had put in front of the camera ever, right? And they did it for that specific reason, right? We needed to look more like this community. That was great. I loved that opportunity. In the same respect, when I graduated from college, I had people that would come to me and tell me, oh, you're going to get a job really quickly because you are a woman and you are a minority. and it would make me so angry.
Yeah, you're
That's
more than
unfair.
that.
You can
Because
write your own
I
ticket.
am more than that. I put myself through school. I did the work. I was doing the hard work every day. I didn't want somebody to look at me like I was just a woman or just a specific color. I put in the work. And so what was great was that I had the opportunity to put in the work, and someone still recognized that about me. And I still had that opportunity, but not just because I walked through the door and that's who I was.
That's great.
And you almost have to prove yourself even more
Yeah.
and say, well, I wasn't just hired because I'm a woman. I wasn't just hired because I'm Hispanic. I have to now be even better than the person who's next to me because I don't want them to have the excuse and the ability to say that about me, you know?
Right.
And from the hiring perspective, I'm all for, hey, but what people fail to realize, depending on the cycle, is I can't find any more Hispanic journalists for my newsroom. Or because they're just not coming out of J school in the numbers right now, because they don't see a future in it. That's true. Or because no, they're not going to work for me because they'll go work for a big metropolitan daily and get paid 3 times the bucks that I can afford. So a lot of times you have to understand that some of these organizations, they do want to try to diversify, and it's, for one reason or another, it's not as easy. I think here's one thing that concerns me the most about our industry, and it goes to all of this that we saw tonight, is I think what this group does is great. And I'm a big believer in that you should consume your news from all sorts of different outlets, like the 19th, or the local TV stations, or the local paper, a magazine, maybe a national, but you should consume your news from a variety of sources, because then you get a better idea of how you come up with your own ideas about that issue, and you're better informed. My fear, though, is that most of society today, they're not consumers of news. They just don't place the value on it. And so, and if they do, they're more lazy. Well, they'll just get it from one. Or they'll say, I'm getting it from a source that gives me the stuff that I like. And so it's an echo chamber. And so you have more people that, A, don't understand all there is to understand. They don't appreciate and understand different types of news organizations and the types of news. But they also are not very well informed about what's going on in the world around them. And that's the thing that scares me more than anything. Because, if you don't have an engaged readership in society, you can try to achieve more diversity, more equality.
It doesn't matter.
It's not going to matter.
Nope.
Well, and I really do believe that our next challenge that we are going to face is that the majority of people are consuming news on their phones through social media, and social media now has really figured out how to curate your feed for you. You are almost exclusively seeing exactly what you liked the previous day.
So you don't get that diversity.
You don't. And so,
You don't get the option.
with my age group and my friends, I'm like, you should watch me sometime. You really should. And they might tune in just because they know me and, it's funny to see her. But no, really, I'm really scared, that
This is the only place
the
they're
TikTok and the Facebook and the YouTube Reels, and that is how they're getting their news. And we're gonna have to figure out how to meet people where they are, but also expand what they're seeing and continue to have healthy debate and encourage that. I think right now in society, it's so hard to disagree with someone, or even to not even disagree, even if you're just challenging a different perspective, a different side of something. Oh, have you ever thought about this? What about this?
But sometimes if you do that, you're opening up a whole new can of worms, because you disagree with me and you think I'm wrong, and that sets off a totally different
and we can't be
discussion.
friends
And
if we disagree
exactly.
anymore. It's
You know,
I can still be your friend.
You can't agree to disagree anymore. It's one side or the other. And that I agree with you. That's sad, and it's scary.
And I'm a big free speech guy. That's why I got into this business in the first place. And it really scares me on where we're headed with that. Because, if you say something that doesn't align with somebody's belief, they'll savage you for it. You know, they'll label it as hate speech. Guess what? Hate speech is protected by the Constitution. You know, but now you're having these speech police going around for both ends of the spectrum, by the way. And it's chilling. I mean, and that's the core of why we got into this business, is free speech. And you know, Mary Kate, what you said is so right. Nowadays, it's just so many people get it off of social media, and it's just digital gossip. And it's not curated, and people don't realize what goes into this. And that was a really neat thing about the documentary tonight too, is what they showed us. They had those we call them budget meetings, where they're all on, and they're talking about all the stories and what are the pros and cons of this, and well, how should we approach this? Well, I didn't see it that way. I noticed one editor and the race relations reporter were saying, that they were seeing something eye to eye, and people need to know that that's what happens every day in our publications and our news organizations. We have editors and reporters meet, and we say, okay, what's going on today? What are you working on?
Why is that important?
What's the big story? How does it impact me? Why should I care?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the news we produce is legitimate news. It's not just fabricated garbage that, you heard from somebody who's from somebody,
And that's why I think AI is going to try to replace journalism. I don't think it's going to be successful in doing that, because like this documentary shows, you need to have real people behind it, real people challenging the people that are producing it. We need to get real feedback from our viewers or our readers, which we do see, by the way, and really do consider, because, journalism is a service. And I do think, the people that are behind it are so important. Who is telling your stories is important, and I don't think that AI is going to be able to have those really nuanced conversations that really are important to journalists, and that really do shape what you see.
When AI first came into the mainstream and everybody was talking about AI and how college students were using it to, do their term papers, I remember having a conversation in studio with our crew during a commercial break. I'm like, I don't like AI. I don't trust AI. I went to school and I was taught you do your own research, you do your own writing. It's all your thought. And if you can just go to an app and say, answer this question for me, and boom, you've got, half your paper done. And then when it started slowly making its way into journalism and everything else, I'm like, I will be the first one to tell you, I don't like AI, I don't trust AI, and I am scared of a world where that's going to become like the main go-to for pretty much everything. I'm not a fan.
We live in a very different world.
Oh, yes.
I mean, from the days you and I first got involved, technologically it's changed light years, and the society's changed too. I mean, it's in many ways for the good, but in some other ways, especially in recent years, in very disturbing ways, I think. Very disturbing. And I think also, like I said, the trend of people just don't care enough to consume news, so they don't know.
Yep.
And that's the other thing, and you kind of touched upon that, Mary Kate, was the beauty of working at a community newspaper or a smaller TV station in these types of communities. You can't even describe the difference between that and working in a large metro market, or in this case, it's kind of a nationwide digital spectrum. And it's that we cover these communities and we live there, and people know us.
Oh, I get feedback at the grocery store.
Exactly.
I didn't like that story you did yesterday.
Exactly.
Point taken. And I will go into the newsroom with that same day.
Y'all should have interviewed me, because I could have told you this, and this. Well, okay, give me your name and number. We'll call you.
And you don't see that in larger markets, and so there's a special bond there that.
And a special responsibility there.
Exactly.
And I think that responsibility is a big part of journalism and why we do what we do. And if you take that part out of it, again, regardless of whether we're male, female, white, black, gay, whatever, if we take the responsibility out of it, then we're not doing our job. We're not doing the job that our community deserves, our world deserves, right?
Yeah, and I think wish we work towards a world where your sex, your orientation, your race, your ethnicity, it's just an incidental about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that helps add color to who you are as a human being, but it doesn't define you. One thing that struck me and it stayed with me all these years was I went to a school with it's through the Medill School in Kellogg at Northwestern as a media management center, and we talked about market studies and everything and knowing your markets and everything, and they had this research data, and what was astonishing about it was they carved up issues that were important to people, and then they carved them up by race and ethnicity and all that, and it was amazing that at the end of the day, pretty much everybody comes down to having the same types of concerns. Mm-hmm. They want to live in a safe community. They want their child to be able to go to a safe school and get a good education and have a better life than they do. They want to be, it's like, wow, there's some things that we all want in this life, and no matter who we are. And so, yeah, if we can respect each other even more and try to help tell each other's story, that's even better.
I've had the luxury, and very few people can say this, my entire 22-year career so far has been in the Midland, Odessa market. I've never worked any other news station other than News West 9. It's like you said, people know you, people recognize you, they call you out at the grocery store, at the fast food restaurant or whatever. But, at the end of the day, just like we've been, trying to get across, if a person can do the job, it doesn't matter if they're male, female, what, background they are, what sexual orientation they are, if they own dogs or cats. If they can do the job and do it well, that should be the only thing that matters. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, with me, I don't think, and this kind of piggybacks with what you just said, I don't think, my personal life, what I do when I leave the station, should affect the way people see me, view me, or, if they like me, they like me. If they don't, they don't. But I want them to base that on my on-air talent, my on-air work, not my personal life, not what I do, from off work to the next, shift. Mm-hmm. Go to work, do your job, do it well, and that's where you earn your respect and, the trust of your viewing audience.
Yeah. And back to something that Pat said really quickly, I think intersectionality is going to be a huge conversation moving forward in the next decade, because there's so much that you don't know about someone by looking at them.
Oh, yeah.
Socioeconomic class could have a way bigger effect on who you are as an adult than your color, your sexuality, the way that you were raised culturally, religiously, politically, all of these intersections. I'm white, but I'm a woman. I'm, all of these things. I think really intersectionality is so important. And then when you boil it down, it's okay. So no matter what these people have been through, what they look like, what do they care about? And that's going to be, I think, really when we're moving forward, the world is so diverse now that eventually we're not even really going to care, or of course we'll always care, but it's not going to be as much of a factor as, so how were you raised? What's important to you? What are your values? That's going to be really how we can tell people apart more than anything else.
Yep.
My co-anchor, Jay Hendricks, has been my greatest mentor, and I think specifically something that's incredibly important to me, which I've touched on already, is that as journalists, you should serve the community. It is a service job to the community, and I'm not from Texas. So I didn't come in with a great understanding of what West Texas really is and how I can best serve the community. Jay Hendricks is from West Texas, and he knows what is important to people. He is so in tune with the community. And so by learning from him, I feel like I am such a greater journalist in this community because I've really been able to embrace it. He has taught me how to embrace serving our community. There is not a Facebook message, an email that goes unanswered by him. And he truly cares. And I think that, again, no matter what your race, sex, sexuality is, if you truly care about what you're doing and you care about the subjects that you're covering, you are going to nail it. I really do believe that. And he's taught me that more than, anything else. So I feel like that makes me a better journalist.
Well, and if we're in talking about Jay, so I have the privilege of working next to Jay for many, many years. And the person that comes to my mind when I think about a newsroom and a mentor for me was John Foster. And John was not on camera. He ran News West 9 way back in the day. So those that have been in this community for a long time know that name. But Jay and myself and so many others in this community in news, we grabbed those things from John. John was that person. John taught us all how to be a part of a community, how to speak to a community, how to tell stories that were about our community, doing great things like Under West Texas Skies for so many years, which I hate that y'all don't have the opportunity to do it the way we did it, because that was, again, it was that touch point where you actually went into those spaces, and we did, 2 weeks of stories, and it was amazing. But, John, he gave us all that, he gave us that from the beginning. And you're so right that it makes you a better person, but it also then makes you a better reporter and storyteller and listener about all of those things. And so John comes to mind for me when I think about news.
I have a very, very special person. I came in to Channel 9 right after John passed, so I didn't get to work with him, but I heard so much about him and worked with so many people that worked with him that I feel that a part of him did rub off on me. But I think the main person that I have gained so much knowledge, so much confidence, if nothing else, is I can consider her my best friend, a member of my family. She was our executive producer here at Channel 9 for a few years, right out of college. She's now the executive morning show producer at NBC4 in LA. She is a 6-time Emmy winner, and her name's Stephanie Miranda. So if you click this, I'm giving you a shout out, sweetheart. But when I started out as a reporter, she was our executive producer at the time. And she gave me so much advice, and she said, we'll try doing this, and she helped me tap into the creative side that I've known I've always had. I just couldn't tap into it. So as I progressed in my career, she moved on. Like I said, she's now at NBC4 in LA and doing very well, but we keep in touch, and I send her clips or I send her links. And she's like, wow. She goes, you've come so far and you've done this. And, I see you're still doing that. I said, remember when I taught you that? And I do. I owe a big chunk of where I am now to Stephanie. And I will forever be grateful for that.
I've had a number of, the ones that stand out the most to me was when I was first starting out in the newspaper business, San Antonio Light. Broad-eyed, bushy-tailed cub, and there's a few of them that really stand out. And there were city editors, assistant city editors, an old guy named Ben Siegel, who's no longer with us, and Fern Chick, and Olene Stone, and Sharon Watkins. And it's interesting that 3 of them were women, and I think they had an effect on me because they really were nurturers, and they were really firm with me, but they were nurturing, and maybe it was the fact that I was a Catholic boy from the 60s, with a lot of Catholic guilt, and out of college, and, I respect the older mother type figures, and so if they told me something, I was going to do that. If Fern told me something, Olene told me something, I was going to do that. And so, but they had such a way of molding me, and it was all about, integrity, doing your best. If you're going to do something, do it right. It's the little things that count, Ben Siegel used to say it all the time, and we talk about trying to be objective. Back then, it was really big when you're covering the news. Olene Stone used to proudly proclaim that the only bumper sticker she had on her car was an Exis Texas life member bumper sticker because she was a member of that alumni. That was the only bumper sticker she would allow in her car because no one was to know what kind of interest she had other than that. So she could be above and beyond the perception of, and so they instilled in me so many values that helped me for the rest of my career. Obviously things have changed in this career, in this industry of ours, but the values they instill with me really helped me. And like I said, those three women were really strong figures. There was, it was a male dominated thing, but they were strong people, and they held their ground. And by God, they taught me how to be tough. I learned how to be tough from three women and a couple of men.
What I think is interesting, I didn't mean to cut you off, but, mentioning the people that, influenced us, the women
None
had
of us
male
chose-
figures
yeah.
and the
Our
males
own-
chose female
yeah.
figures. And it's exactly the opposite of, well, actually, it just kind of goes in line with what the film was showing, how we've gone from a male-dominated industry to, something that's more integrated. And that's just the progression of this industry, and that's the way it's gone.
Yeah, none of us chose mentors that look like us, and we talk a lot too about representation now. And I do think it is incredibly important to see representation and to see that people have gone before you and you can do it too. But I also think that, what we've really come to a conclusion on is that the right people bring out the best in you, in your work. And that's amazing no matter what they look like, no matter who they are.
Talk about bringing life experiences to your work. Ben Siegel was a perfect example of that. He was an Orthodox Jew, and which meant that he had to be home every Friday before sundown. And you couldn't call him, didn't matter if a plane was hitting the Tower of the Americas, you couldn't call him to after the Sabbath. Okay? And he lived his religion with such fervency. I think he was made a city editor, or he turned it down because he wasn't going to be able to do that because of his religion. But the thing is, his fealty to that gave him this kind of quality in his loyalty to the people he worked with, and his loyalty to helping me grow as a person. And I remember after I left the light and our first child was born, he wanted to come down. He drove all the way down to Rio Grande Valley to visit our firstborn child and bring him a little outfit. So those your life experiences, maybe they not all the time they color the way you cover something, but your life experiences color the way you work as a person and how you can be successful as a person too. And he was a perfect example of